The more one learns about the myths, legends, and religions of the human race, the more imperative is the demand that one somehow make sense of them as a whole. Their competing voices, their incompatible dogmas, call for the stern hand of a moderator who will bring meaning and unity to the whole assembly. The first tentative efforts of this kind were those of the medieval mythographers, as they tried to make something of the literary and archaeological debris of classical civilization. One landmark is Boccaccio's Genealogy of the Gods, a marvel of erudition for its time, the second half of the 14th century. Following the interpretive procedure of the Christian fathers, for whom paganism had no spiritual value save a certain ethical uprightness, Boccaccio used moral edification as his key. That's from chapter 11, The Symbolic Pole in Arctos, The Polar Myth in Science, Symbolism, and Nazi Survival by Jocelyn Godwin. And that's an Adventures Unlimited Press book. Hello and welcome to another edition of The Stench of Truth. Joe Stack, the IRS plane bomber guy, if you want to call him that, the man who had had enough with the IRS. I don't claim and will not make any claim to know anything about this man's past and his run-ins with the IRS other than what was written in his several-page detailed online blog, which doesn't really go into a lot of detail about anything that he suffered at the hands of the IRS, except to state that he lost all of his money to them on a couple of different occasions. I don't know what he did. I have no idea what kind of situation he was in and how exactly he ran afoul of the IRS. But one thing is absolutely clear, my friends, and that is that the IRS is pretty much a Orwellian rogue agency, which is very capable and very easily done by it to drive an individual, a family, or a company to the very edge of sanity and or into acts that might involve flying a plane into a building. And other things. You know, we've had recent activity against supposed tax protesters and tax resistors, and we've had this sort of thing as an undercurrent within the movement that is against the federal government in some fashion or another. You know, tax protesters are thrown in and lumped in as a group with very many different groups that they may not even have anything in common with. And it's universally regarded as, in the media, as being cranks, kooks, and nut jobs. What's the proper response to this? Now, I'm going to leave aside for the moment the arguments as to whether or not Joe Stack really did this as a result of desperation, or whether or not, you know, he was a programmed patsy that did this in order to, you know, allow for greater encroachment into so-called rightist groups and, you know, even the Tea Party movement itself, which I would think is not going to suffer any great tragedy as a result of this because of being completely co-opted by the right wing of the Republican Party. But we'll leave that aside for the moment just to discuss what is the proper approach and answer to this particular predicament. And that is that we need to look at what can be done to do away with the IRS in a positive, political, activist manner, not in a quote-unquote resistance movement, not in a quote-unquote tax protester way, and not by buying into any of these ridiculous scams that say in one fashion or another that you don't have to pay your taxes, and that you can get out of doing this by following these very simple things that you find all over the internet, which to my mind is all a bunch of malarkey. Even if they're true, even if they're accurate reflections of reality, the reality that you're dealing with in this country today is what the courts decide. And it doesn't matter whether it's legal, constitutional, whatever. It makes no difference. If the courts say that your argument is foolish, and I've already discussed this in the past, and they've already handed down rulings on it, if you come before them again with the same argument, thinking that, well, they can't possibly be against this because it's illegal, it's immoral, it's irrational. If they've already made a ruling on it, precedent has been set, they'll throw your case out, they'll laugh at you, and they'll slap extra fines on you for, bringing a case of that sort. So that is not the answer. What is the answer is to approach this from a perspective of doing away with the IRS in whatever manner that you decide. Now, I've talked before about the fair tax and some of the reasons why I oppose it, because we have such a corporate-dominated climate in this country already. The fair tax, in my mind, cannot ever be fair when it's applied to individuals and families. Okay, where corporations are able to make more money, they will, and there is really no competition in order to drive down the prices between Corporation A and Corporation B, because most of them have bought out all of their lesser competitors. So, when you say you're going to remove embedded taxes and just have a national sales tax, I'm sorry, the embedded sales tax is not going to go away. I just don't believe it, because we're dealing with greedy corporations, and because you don't have any effective competition, there is nothing to make Corporation A, which owns all of the shoemaking companies, there's nothing to make them, lower their prices in correspondence with a new national sales tax. So I don't agree with that as an approach, but neither do I agree that one's hard-earned wages should be subject to a punitive taxation. And if taxes need to be collected, it should be done on a progressive scale, and that is that people should be taxed based on their ability to pay. The less money you make, the less money you can give in taxes, the less percentage you should pay. It seems like a very simple thing to say, but a lot of people will look at that and have 250 labels for it. But it stands to reason to me that if you're living good in this country, making a huge amount of money, you can afford to pay more in taxes. Simple. A greater percentage, a greater amount in dollars, etc. If you are living very meagerly and can barely support your family and barely pay your mortgage and probably not even be able to own your own vehicle, you should pay substantially less, simply because you do not have the means to do so. And while some might call that socialist or left-wing or whatever kind of name you want to give it, is irrelevant. Okay? It is a rational approach, at least in the short term. So that means political activism to, in the short term, change and revamp the system so that people and families are not gutted and destroyed by this system, and to make the taxation more progressive, but in the long term to abolish the IRS and to come up with some alternative system that encompasses all of the progressive ideals that all of, I think, well, not all, but most of the viewers of my videos would hold. And that is less punitive towards individuals and families and more geared towards corporations, big business, and even possibly doing away with taxation altogether in favor of protective tariffs, which is what this country lived on for like 100 years or so. So, there are positive political actions that can be taken and that should be taken. And we should use this opportunity to focus attention on the IRS and taxation so that we can spur positive political action rather than having, Joe Stack be a representative of, as sad and terrible as his story and situation is, I'm sure, and what he did as a political statement is certainly not what we want to achieve. But having him as our representative for a regressive, backward, Orwellian tax system, is not something that we want either. So let's use this as a point of departure so that we can bring the issue out in a positive political light and hopefully affect some change. Thank you. Good night.